The alarm screamed across the command center as another city died. Captain watched the live feed from orbit, his blue hands shaking as he gripped the control panel. Below them, the planet's capital burned under the hegemony's energy weapons. Millions of his people were dead, and more died every minute. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the evacuation ships," his communications officer said. Her voice cracked with fear and exhaustion. They had been fighting for 3 months now, and everyone knew they were losing. "Put it through," ordered. The hologram showed a crowded refugee ship, hundreds of families pressed together, their children crying. An old woman spoke directly to the camera. "Please, Captain, please find someone to help us. We don't want to die. Our children don't want to die." Closed his eyes. They had sent messages to every major power in the galaxy. They said they were reviewing the situation. The Confederacy promised to consider all options. The Empire offered their thoughts and prayers, but no ships, no weapons, no help. The hegemony fleet had appeared 3 months ago without warning. They didn't want the worlds for resources or territory. They simply wanted the people dead. Their admiral had broadcast his intentions clearly. "Your species has lived too long in our space. It is time for you to disappear." The Galactic Council had called emergency meetings. Politicians gave speeches about the tragic situation and the complex political realities. But when the votes came, the result was always the same. No intervention, no help. The major powers wouldn't risk war over a small species like the. Opened his eyes and looked at his tactical display. Red dots showed the enemy ships. There were 500 of them now, growing stronger every day. His own fleet was down to 23 fighters and 2 damaged cruisers. They couldn't protect the evacuation ships much longer. "Sir," another officer called out, "we're getting a priority transmission from the Galactic Council." The hologram changed to show Chancellor of the Republic. The tall, elegant alien looked tired but official. Behind him, could see the Grand Council chambers where representatives from dozens of species made decisions that affected billions of lives. "Captain," the Chancellor said formally, "the Galactic Council has reached its final decision regarding the situation in your system." Felt his heart sink. He knew what was coming. After careful consideration of all legal and political factors, the Council has voted to maintain its policy of non-interference. The Galactic Accords clearly state that sovereign conflicts must be resolved without outside intervention. Chancellor interrupted, "They're murdering children. This isn't a war, it's genocide." "We understand your pain, Captain, but the law is clear. If we intervene in one conflict, we set a dangerous precedent. The stability of the entire galaxy depends on respect for sovereignty." "What about respect for life?" asked, but the transmission had already ended. Around the command center, his officers stared at their screens in silence. They all understood what this meant. No help was coming. They were alone. "Orders, sir," his tactical officer asked quietly. "Continue the evacuation," said. "Save who we can." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't enough. The refugee ships were slow and barely armed. The hegemony would hunt them down eventually. His people would die not just today, but in the weeks and months to come, scattered and defenseless across the galaxy. Far away, in the council chambers, the representatives were already moving on to other business. Trade disputes and territorial negotiations that seemed much more important than the extinction of an entire species. They were small and weak. They produced nothing vital, controlled no strategic resources, commanded no fleets that could threaten anyone else. In the cold calculations of galactic politics, they simply didn't matter. But in a system 8,000 light-years away, someone was listening. Deep in Earth's solar system, Admiral Sarah sat in her command chair aboard the UES Indomitable. The massive ship floated in the darkness beyond Pluto, one of dozens in humanity's secret defense fleet. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of computers processing data from across the galaxy. Admiral, her intelligence officer reported, "We've been monitoring the Galactic Council's decision regarding the situation." Nodded, they had been tracking the crisis from the beginning. Earth's deep space monitoring stations intercepted communications from thousands of star systems every day. Most of it was routine traffic, trade negotiations, and diplomatic messages, but some of it was distress calls like the ones coming from space. "What's our current legal status?" asked. "We're still listed as a probationary species, ma'am. 50 years since first contact, but we don't have full council membership. Technically, we have no standing to act in galactic conflicts." Stared at the tactical display showing the system. Red icons marked the hegemony ships. Blue icons showed the few remaining defenders. It was a slaughter in slow motion, and everyone with the power to stop it had chosen to look away. "Admiral," her communications officer said, "we're receiving a personal message from President Martinez. Priority Alpha." The hologram showed Earth's leader in her office in Geneva. President Martinez looked as tired as felt. Leading humanity in a galaxy that barely acknowledged their existence was not an easy job. "Sarah," the president said without preamble, "I've been watching the reports from the system. The Security Council has been debating for hours." And asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Defense Minister Jackson thinks we should stay out of it. Says we can't risk our position in the galaxy over aliens we've never even met. The Secretary of State agrees. Says intervention could mean war with the major powers." Waited, she had worked with Martinez for 10 years. She knew there was more coming. "But I keep thinking about what happened to us," the president continued. 300 years ago, when the plague almost wiped us out. If another species had been watching, if they had the power to help but chose not to, what would we think of them?" "We'd think they were cowards," said simply. "Exactly. I'm calling a full Defense Council meeting. But Sarah, I want you to know that if we decide to act, I'm asking you to lead the mission." Looked around her bridge at the officers who had served with her through the Titan War and the Mars Rebellion. They had all sworn an oath to protect Earth and humanity. But that oath had always meant something more to them. It meant protecting the idea that some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed impossible. "If the Council approves the mission," said, "we'll be ready." The transmission ended, and the bridge fell silent. Outside the ship's windows, the stars looked cold and distant. Somewhere among them, a species was dying while the galaxy's most powerful civilizations debated legal technicalities. Activated her ship's communication system. "All fleet commanders, this is Admiral. Prepare for possible combat operations. Full readiness in 12 hours." Across the solar system, humanity's war fleet began to wake up. 3 weeks passed like a nightmare for the people. Every day brought new attacks from the hegemony fleet. Every day, more cities died under their weapons. Captain had moved his command to the last orbital defense station above Prime, though that now held the final million survivors of his species. The evacuation ships were gone now, scattered to distant systems where they hoped to hide. But knew the truth. The hegemony would hunt them down eventually. His people would die not as a civilization, but as refugees begging for shelter in a galaxy that had already forgotten them. "Sir," his tactical officer said, "the enemy fleet is moving into final attack position." Through the station's windows, could see the hegemony ships approaching. 500 massive warships, their black hulls marked with the red symbols of conquest. Admiral had promised to finish what he called the pest extermination within the day. On the planet below, families huddled in underground shelters. Children who had never known peace pressed close to parents who could no longer promise them safety. The planetary defense grid was down to its last few weapons. The orbital platforms were running out of ammunition. "Incoming transmission from the hegemony flagship," the communications officer reported. The hologram showed Admiral in his command armor. The alien's face was cruel and proud. Behind him could see the massive bridge of a ship designed for one purpose, destroying worlds. "Captain," said with mock politeness, "your people have fought well for insects, but the game is over. Surrender now, and I will make your deaths quick." "We will never surrender," replied. Laughed a harsh sound that echoed through the command center. "Then you will die slowly, but you will die. Today they become history." The transmission ended. Around him, officers prepared for their final battle. They were soldiers, but they were also fathers and mothers, sons and daughters. They knew they would not see another sunrise. "All stations report ready, sir," his tactical officer said quietly. Nodded and opened a channel to all ships and stations. "This is Captain to all defenders. Today we fight not for victory but for honor. We fight so that history will remember the stood against evil until the end. We fight for our children, wherever they are now. May our sacrifice give them time to find safety." The hegemony fleet began its final advance. 8,000 light-years away, the most important meeting in human history was taking place in a secure bunker beneath the Swiss Alps. The Earth Defense Council sat around a circular table, their faces lit by holographic displays showing the situation in space. President Martinez looked around the table at the leaders who would decide humanity's future. Defense Minister Jackson argued for caution. "We're talking about war with species that have been spacefaring for thousands of years. We've been in space for barely 2 centuries. The math doesn't work." Secretary of State Williams nodded in agreement. "Our position in the galactic community is already fragile. If we break the accords now, we could be expelled from the council. We could become pariahs." "We could become dead," said General from the Army. "If we show the galaxy we're willing to fight when others won't, we make ourselves targets." Admiral sat quietly through the arguments. She had heard them all before during the planning sessions. Fear of the unknown, fear of consequences, fear of standing alone against the galaxy's established powers. "Admiral," President Martinez said finally, "you've been quiet. What's your assessment?" Activated her personal display. The hologram showed detailed intelligence reports on every major fleet in the galaxy. Ship counts, weapon capabilities, tactical doctrines. Information that humanity had gathered through 50 years of careful observation and analysis. "Madam President," said calmly, "we've been preparing for this moment since the day we joined the galactic community. Not this exact situation, but the moment when we would have to choose between safety and principle." She highlighted sections of the intelligence reports. They have superior numbers but outdated tactics. The Confederacy has advanced technology but poor coordination. The Empire has good ships but their crews are undertrained. "What about the hegemony?" Defense Minister Jackson asked. "Brutal but predictable. They rely on overwhelming force and intimidation. They've never faced an enemy that could match their firepower." Paused. "They've certainly never faced an enemy that understood their psychology." President Martinez leaned forward. "Explain." "The hegemony fights to dominate. We fight to survive. They see war as a game of power. We see it as a test of will. They attack the weak because they believe might makes right. We protect the weak because we believe it makes us human." Stood and walked to the center of the room. 300 years ago, an alien plague almost wiped out our species. We survived not because we were the strongest but because we refused to give up. We learned something that day that these galactic powers have never learned. "Which is?" Williams asked. "That survival isn't about being the biggest predator. It's about being willing to do whatever it takes to protect what matters. The galaxy has forgotten that lesson. They've become comfortable in their power, lazy in their thinking. They solve problems through politics and compromise." Activated another display showing Earth's hidden military capabilities. Ships built in secret shipyards. Weapons designed by scientists who remembered humanity's near extinction. technologies developed by engineers who understood that the universe was not a safe place. We've spent 50 years letting them think we were just another minor species, grateful for their acceptance, careful not to offend, but we've been watching, learning, preparing. The room fell silent as the council members studied the display. Ship after ship appeared on the hologram, fleets hidden in the outer system, weapons platforms disguised as research stations, an entire military infrastructure built while the galaxy wasn't paying attention. "My God," whispered Defense Minister Jackson, "how do we keep this secret?" "Because they never bothered to look closely," replied. "To them, we're primitives who discovered space travel yesterday. They assume we think like them, act like them, fight like them. They're wrong." President Martinez studied the display for a long moment. Numbers. 300 ships ready for immediate deployment. Another 200 in reserve, all equipped with technologies the galaxy has never seen. Against how many enemy ships? The hegemony has 500 in the system, but they're configured for orbital bombardment, not ship-to-ship combat. If we hit them hard and fast, we can break their fleet before they can adapt. Secretary Williams shook his head. And then what? We'll have made enemies of every major power in the galaxy. Will we? Asked. Or will we have shown them that someone still remembers what principles look like? She activated one final display. The Galactic Council has stood by and watched 17 minor species go extinct in the last century. 17 entire civilizations that disappeared while the major powers debated politics. The galaxy has become a place where might makes right and the strong prey on the weak without consequences. "That's not our responsibility," Defense Minister Jackson said. "Isn't it?" President Martinez asked quietly. "We have the power to help. We have the technology to make a difference. If we don't act, who will?" The room fell silent again. Outside, Earth continued its ancient rotation around the sun that had warmed humanity for millions of years. But the humans in that room knew they were deciding more than just the fate of an alien species they had never met. They were deciding what kind of people they wanted to be in a universe that had grown cold and calculating. "All in favor of Operation Moral Compass?" President Martinez asked. One by one, hands rose around the table. Even Defense Minister Jackson, after a long hesitation, raised his hand. "Unanimous," Martinez said. "Admiral, you have full authorization to deploy the fleet." Activated her communicator. "Fleet Command, this is Admiral. Execute Operation Moral Compass. All ships to launch positions immediately." Across the solar system, humanity's secret war fleet began to move. Ships that had waited years for this moment powered up their engines. Crews that had trained for this day reported to battle stations. Weapons systems that had been tested in absolute secrecy came online. In the hidden shipyards of the outer system, Admiral's flagship, the UES Indomitable, led the formation toward the edge of human space. Behind her, 299 other ships followed in perfect formation. They were going to do something that no one in the galaxy expected. They were going to do what was right, regardless of the consequences. They were going to remind the universe what it meant to stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. The Earth War fleet was going to war. Captain watched the enemy ships approach through the smoke and debris that had once been Prime's outer defense ring. His last orbital platform shook under enemy fire. The shields were failing. The weapons were down to emergency power. Around him, his officers worked frantically to keep their dying station operational for just a few more minutes. "Sir, the evacuation shuttles have cleared the atmosphere," his tactical officer reported. "The last civilians are away." Nodded. At least they had saved some people. A few thousand refugees in ships that would probably be hunted down and destroyed within the week, but it was something. His people would not completely vanish from the universe. "Hegemony flagship is hailing us again," the communications officer said. "Ignore it," ordered. He had nothing left to say to Admiral. The hegemony commander wanted surrender and would rather die fighting. The tactical display showed the approaching enemy fleet. 500 ships in perfect formation, their weapons charging for the final bombardment of Prime. Once they destroyed this last defense platform, nothing would stop them from turning the planet's surface into molten glass. "Sir," the sensor operator called out, "I'm detecting hyperspace distortions. Multiple contacts emerging at the edge of the system." "More hegemony ships?" asked tiredly. "No, sir, these signatures are different, unknown configuration. They're big, sir, really big." On the main display, new contacts began appearing. Dozens of them, then hundreds. Ships unlike anything in the database materialized from hyperspace in perfect formation. They were sleek and dangerous looking, with hull designs that seemed both alien and strangely familiar. "Are they Council ships?" asked hopefully. His sensor operator shook her head. "No, sir. These don't match any known galactic fleet configurations. The hull materials, the energy signatures, everything is completely unknown." Suddenly, his communications board lit up with an incoming transmission. The frequency was strange, the encryption unlike anything he had ever seen. His officer looked at him questioningly. "Put it through," said. Maybe these were mercenaries. Maybe someone with a conscience had finally decided to help, even if the major powers wouldn't. The hologram that appeared showed a human female in a military uniform. Had heard of humans, of course. They were one of the newer species in the galaxy, barely 50 years since first contact. They were supposed to be primitive, with limited technology and no real military power. The woman's voice was calm and confident. "Defense Corps, this is Admiral Sarah of the Earth War Fleet. We are here to help. Hold your positions." Stared at the hologram in shock. Earth War Fleet. Humans had a war fleet. The intelligence report said they had maybe a dozen ships, mostly converted cargo vessels, but his sensors were showing hundreds of advanced warships. "Admiral," he said carefully, "we appreciate any assistance, but you should know the situation here. The hegemony has 500 ships. The Galactic Council has ordered non-interference. If you help us, you'll be violating galactic law." The human admiral smiled grimly. "Captain, we've spent considerable time analyzing galactic law. We've found it to be selectively enforced and morally bankrupt. We're here to help, law or no law." Before could respond, another voice cut into the communications channel. This one came from the Galactic Council patrol fleet that had been maintaining the quarantine around space. "Unknown vessels, this is Fleet Commander Vex of the Republic. You are in violation of Galactic Council Resolution 4471. B. This system is under quarantine. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." On the tactical display, could see the Council patrol ships. 50 of them, positioned between the unknown human fleet and Prime. They were some of the most advanced ships in the galaxy, commanded by experienced officers who had enforced Council decisions for decades. Admiral's response was broadcast on all frequencies. "Commander Vex, this is Admiral of the Earth War Fleet. We are conducting a humanitarian mission. Stand aside." "Negative," Commander Vex replied sharply. "The Council has voted. No interference is permitted. I order you to withdraw to the edge of the system immediately." There was a pause. Then Admiral spoke again, her voice carrying a tone that made even feel cold. "Commander, we have spent considerable time studying your fleet. We know your ship classes, your weapons systems, your tactical doctrines. We know your crew training standards and your supply limitations. We know exactly what your ships can and cannot do." The transmission continued. "You have 30 seconds to move your ships out of our path, or we will move them for you. This is not a negotiation." Felt his heart's racing. The humans were threatening the Galactic Council fleet. That was impossible, suicidal. The ships were equipped with the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. They had shields that could stop planet crackers. They were commanded by officers who had fought in a dozen wars. Commander Vex's response crackled with anger. "You dare threaten Council ships? You're a primitive species with converted cargo haulers. Stand down immediately or face destruction." 20 seconds, Admiral said calmly. On the far side of the system, Admiral of the Hegemony Fleet had been watching this exchange with growing amusement. His communication came through on an open channel. "How delightful! The galaxy's weakest species comes to rescue its fellow insects. I will enjoy destroying you both." 10 seconds announced. Commander Vex hesitated. Something about the human's tone suggested this was not a bluff, but backing down from a species like humanity would end his career. The political consequences would be enormous. 5 seconds. "I will not be threatened by primitives," Vex declared. "All ships maintain position. Prepare to engage hostile vessels." "Time's up," Admiral said simply. What happened next would be talked about in military academies across the galaxy for centuries. The human ships moved with perfect coordination, each vessel executing maneuvers that seemed to defy physics. They didn't fire on the Council ships. Instead, they simply appeared around them. One moment the fleet was in defensive formation. The next moment, every Council ship found itself surrounded by human vessels at point-blank range. Weapons that seemed impossibly large for ships of their size were aimed directly at critical systems. "Commander Vex," Admiral said, her voice still perfectly calm, "your shields are now useless. Your weapons are targeted. Your engines are locked onto by systems you don't understand. You can withdraw your ships voluntarily or we can withdraw them for you. Choose quickly." Watched in amazement as the most advanced fleet in galactic space sat helplessly surrounded by ships from a species they had dismissed as primitive. The human formation was perfect, their positioning flawless. Somehow they had moved faster than sensors could track. Commander Vex's voice was strained when he finally spoke. "Earth Fleet, this is an act of war against the Galactic Council." "No," Admiral replied, "this is an act of conscience, something your council seems to have forgotten. Now move your ships." After a long pause, Commander Vex gave the order. "All ships withdraw to safe distance. Monitor but do not engage." The Council ships began moving away, their crews probably still trying to understand how they had been outmaneuvered so completely. As the human fleet reformed into attack formation, positioning themselves between the hegemony forces and Prime. Admiral's laughter echoed across the communication channels. "Magnificent! The insects show their teeth, but you have only delayed their destruction, humans. My fleet will crush you and the Together." Admiral's response was directed to all ships in the system. "Hegemony forces, you are guilty of genocide against the people. You have 1 hour to begin withdrawing from this system. Any ship remaining after that deadline will be considered a hostile target and treated accordingly." 1 hour, laughed even harder. "I will give you 1 minute before I destroy your pathetic fleet. You may have surprised the Council ships with some clever trick, but we are the hegemony. We have conquered 100 worlds. We do not fear insects." Found himself holding his breath. The humans had somehow neutralized the Council patrol, but the hegemony fleet was different. These were ships built for war, crewed by soldiers who lived for battle. They had never been defeated in open combat. "Admiral," he said quietly, "the hegemony ships are very dangerous. They've destroyed every fleet that ever stood against them." The human admiral looked directly at him through the hologram. Her eyes were hard but somehow sad. "Captain, the hegemony has never faced a species that fights the way humans fight. They're about to learn the difference between conquest and survival." On the tactical display, the hegemony fleet was moving into attack formation. 500 massive warships, their weapons charging, their crews eager for battle. They had been looking forward to this moment since the humans first appeared. Admiral opened one final communication channel. Humans, you have chosen to die for insects. I will make your deaths memorable. Attack. Show them the power of the hegemony. The first hegemony ships opened fire, their energy beams reaching across space toward the human fleet. Captain watched, waiting to see the human ships destroyed by weapons that could crack planets. Instead, something impossible happened. The hegemony weapons simply stopped. The energy beams hit some kind of barrier around the human ships and disappeared. Not deflected, not absorbed. They just stopped existing. Admiral's voice carried across the system one last time. All human ships, you are free to engage. Show them what we learned from nearly dying. The Earth War fleet attacked. The space around Prime exploded into chaos as 500 hegemony ships opened fire on the human fleet. Their weapons lit up the darkness with streams of energy that could melt continents. Admiral stood on his flagship's bridge, watching the attack with satisfaction. No fleet had ever survived the full power of the hegemony war machine. But the human ships didn't die. Energy beams that should have destroyed them simply vanished when they hit the human vessels. Plasma bolts that could crack moons disappeared into nothingness. Missile salvos that could destroy space stations exploded harmlessly against barriers that seemed to bend reality itself. "What is happening?" demanded. His weapons officer was staring at his displays in confusion. "Sir, our weapons are having no effect. It's like they're hitting some kind of null field. The energy is just disappearing." On his command platform above Prime, Captain watched in amazement as the human fleet moved through the hegemony attack unharmed. The Earth ships flowed between the enemy weapons like water, each vessel moving in perfect coordination with all the others. "How are they doing that?" his tactical officer whispered. Had no answer. The human ships moved unlike anything he had ever seen. They twisted and turned through space as if gravity meant nothing to them. They accelerated and stopped instantly, without the momentum that should have crushed their crews. They flew in formations that should have been impossible to maintain. But it was their weapons that truly understanding. The humans fired back, and their weapons cut through hegemony ships like they were made of paper. Where energy beams from the Earth fleet touched enemy hulls, the metal simply ceased to exist. Chunks of hegemony dreadnoughts disappeared, leaving perfectly smooth cuts that showed the ship's interiors. "Impossible," Admiral breathed as he watched one of his heavy cruisers come apart in sections. "Our armor can stop anything. Our shields can deflect planet killers." But the human weapons ignored both armor and shields. They cut through the strongest materials in the galaxy as if they weren't there. Worse, the cuts seemed to spread. Metal around the impact points began dissolving, weakening entire ship sections until they broke apart under stress. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "we're receiving damage reports from all sectors. The human weapons are. They're not just destroying our ships, sir. They're making the damage spread. Hull sections are falling apart minutes after impact." From her position in space, Admiral watched the battle unfold exactly as her tacticians had predicted. The hegemony ships were powerful but predictable. They relied on overwhelming force and heavy armor. They had never faced weapons designed by a species that understood materials science at the molecular level. "Target their command ships first," she ordered. "Break their coordination." Human fighters launched from the larger ships, piloted by actual humans rather than computer systems. The small craft moved through space like living things, dodging between hegemony weapons with impossible precision. Each fighter carried weapons that could destroy ships 100 times their size. Admiral watched in growing horror as his fleet was systematically destroyed. The humans weren't just winning. They were demonstrating a level of technological superiority that he had never imagined possible. "Send a distress call to the Council fleet," he ordered desperately. "Sir, they're maintaining their distance. Commander Vex says the Accords prohibit interference in sovereign conflicts." The irony was not lost on. He had used those exact words to justify the slaughter of the. Now, as his own fleet died around him, the council was throwing his arguments back at him. Captain was receiving real-time tactical data from the human fleet. Their computers were interfacing seamlessly with systems, providing information about enemy movements and weak points. It was as if the humans had been preparing for this exact battle for years. "Sir," his communications officer said excitedly, "the humans are sending us targeting data. They're marking hegemony ships that are trying to escape. Can our remaining weapons reach them?" "Yes, sir. The humans are providing firing solutions for our orbital cannons." Smiled grimly, his people would get their revenge after all. All weapons fire as directed. The few remaining defense platforms added their fire to the human attack. It felt good to fight back after months of helpless retreat. Even better to fight alongside allies who actually seemed to know what they were doing. But it was the human tactics that truly amazed him. They didn't just attack randomly. Each move was calculated to cause maximum psychological damage to the enemy. When hegemony ships tried to retreat, human vessels would appear in front of them, blocking their escape. When enemy commanders tried to regroup, human fighters would target their communication arrays. Most disturbing of all, the humans seemed to understand hegemony psychology perfectly. They targeted the ships of commanders known for cruelty first, making examples of officers who had committed the worst atrocities. They left communication channels open so that enemy crews could hear their officers' final screams. Admiral found himself alone on his bridge as his fleet died around him. His escort ships were gone. His heavy cruisers had been systematically destroyed. Even his flagship's shields were failing under weapons that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. "Admiral," his tactical officer reported with a shaking voice, "we've lost 80% of the fleet. Should we signal surrender?" "The hegemony does not surrender," snarled. But even as he said it, he was calculating escape routes. This battle was lost. The question now was whether he could save enough ships to report what had happened here. A new voice cut through his bridge communications. Admiral herself was speaking directly to him. "Admiral, this is Admiral of the Earth War Fleet. Your ships are beaten. Your crews are dying. You can end this now by ordering your remaining vessels to withdraw, or we can finish what you started." Looked at his tactical display. Less than 100 of his ships remained operational, and they were scattered across the system. The human fleet was still intact, still moving with that impossible coordination. "Who are you?" he asked finally. "What are you?" "We're humans," replied simply. "We're a species that almost went extinct once. We learned from that experience. We learned that survival isn't about being the strongest. It's about being willing to do whatever it takes to protect what matters." "And what matters to you?" demanded. "Life, the right of peaceful species to exist without being murdered by bullies like you." His anger flared. "You know nothing about the galaxy. The strong rule and the weak serve. That is the natural order." "Is it?" His voice was calm but deadly. "Then explain why your strong fleet is losing to a species you called primitive." Around him, his bridge officers were staring at their screens in defeat. The remaining hegemony ships were either retreating or burning in space. The battle was over. The hegemony had been utterly defeated by opponents they had dismissed as insects. "You got lucky," said weakly. "Admiral," replied, "luck had nothing to do with it. We studied you for 50 years. We know how you think, how you fight, how you break. We came here with weapons designed specifically to counter your technology. We brought tactics developed specifically to exploit your weaknesses." She paused, letting that sink in. "You want to know why you lost? You lost because you thought strength was about the size of your guns. We know strength is about the depth of your commitment." From his command platform, Captain watched the last hegemony ships flee toward the edge of the system. The human fleet let them go, but he could see escort ships shadowing them at long range. The survivors would be allowed to leave, but they would be watched. Admiral's voice reached every ship in the system. Hegemony forces have 36 hours to evacuate space completely. Any ship found in this system after that deadline will be considered a continuing threat and dealt with accordingly. The communication channels fell silent except for the scattered distress calls from damaged hegemony ships. In less than 4 hours, the human fleet had destroyed one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. Commander Vex of the Council Fleet had been watching from the edge of the system. His 50 ships had not fired a single shot during the battle, paralyzed by legal restrictions and political calculations. Now he found himself facing a terrible truth. "Communications," he ordered quietly, "send a message to Council headquarters. Priority Alpha." "Yes, sir." Vex stared at the tactical display showing human ships moving among the wreckage of the hegemony fleet. They were rescuing survivors, even from enemy ships. Even after the battle, they were still trying to save lives. "Tell the Council that everything has changed," he said finally. "Tell them the humans are not what we thought they were. Tell them that someone in this galaxy still remembers what principles look like." On his flagship, Admiral was receiving reports from her captains. Minimal human casualties. Mission objectives achieved. Enemy fleet neutralized. The people were safe. But she knew this was only the beginning. Word of this battle would spread across the galaxy within days. Every major power would be analyzing the combat recordings, trying to understand how a primitive species had so completely defeated one of their strongest fleets. Some would see opportunity, others would see threat. All would see that the galaxy's balance of power had just shifted in a way no one had expected. "Admiral," her communications officer reported, "we're receiving messages from 17 different star systems. They're all requesting assistance against various threats." Nodded, she had expected this. News of the battle would travel fast, and there were many species in the galaxy who lived in fear of stronger neighbors. For the first time in decades, they had seen someone willing to stand up to bullies. "Tell them we'll review their situations," she said, "and prepare a message for Earth. Tell them the fleet is ready for extended operations." The battle was over, but the real work was just beginning. 1 week after the Battle of Prime, the most important political meeting in galactic history began in the council chambers on Altair VII. Representatives from every major power in the galaxy sat around the massive circular table, their faces grim and their voices tense. The holographic displays showed military fleet positions across known space, but everyone knew the numbers had changed forever. Chancellor of the Republic called the session to order. His elegant features looked tired, aged by the stress of recent events. Behind him, the Great Seal of the Galactic Council seemed smaller somehow, less important than it had been a week ago. "We are here," the Chancellor began formally, "to address the unprecedented actions taken by the Earth Defense Fleet in the system. Actions that have violated the fundamental principles of galactic law and threatened the stability of our civilization." War Marshal of the Empire leaned forward aggressively. His red armor gleamed under the chamber lights. "Let us speak plainly, Chancellor. The humans have declared war on the established order. They have shown that they possess military capabilities that dwarf our own. The question before us is simple. Do we submit or do we fight?" "Fight with what?" asked Trade Minister Velen of the Confederacy. Her tentacles writhed with nervous energy. "Our intelligence reports are clear. The human fleet destroyed 500 hegemony ships in 4 hours. 500 of the most advanced warships in the galaxy, destroyed by a species we considered primitive." The arguments continued for hours, representatives shouting accusations and demands across the chamber. But everyone knew the real question being debated. Everything had changed when the humans decided to ignore galactic law and do what they thought was right. Now the major powers had to decide how to respond to a new player who didn't follow their rules. The debate was interrupted when the chamber's security systems activated. Emergency lights flashed as an unauthorized transmission began broadcasting directly into the room. Despite all their advanced security, someone was speaking to them without permission. Admiral Sarah appeared as a hologram in the center of the chamber, her image solid and clear. She wore her dress uniform, but her hand rested casually on her sidearm. Behind her, they could see the bridge of a human warship, with officers moving efficiently about their duties. "Honored representatives," she said calmly, "I apologize for interrupting your debate, but I thought you might benefit from first-hand information about human intentions." Chancellor rose from his seat, his face flushed with anger. "Admiral, this is an outrageous violation of Council sovereignty. You have no right to address this body. Humanity is not even a full member of the Council." "You're correct," replied smoothly. "We're not members of your Council. As of 1 week ago, Earth formally from all galactic treaties and agreements. We are no longer bound by your laws, your politics, or your moral failures." The chamber erupted in shouts and accusations, but continued speaking, her voice somehow cutting through the noise. "You spent months debating the complex political realities, while an entire species was murdered. You chose legal technicalities over the lives of millions of innocent people. You proved that your system values order over justice, politics over principles." War Marshal stood, his armor's weapon systems powering up automatically. "You dare lecture us about morality while holding the galaxy hostage with illegal weapons." His expression didn't change. "Marshal, we've been monitoring your fleet movements. 18 battle groups positioned around human space, ready to attack if we show weakness. Your weapons are targeting civilian populations on our colony worlds. Are you really going to lecture me about illegal actions?" The War Marshal's face went pale. The human intelligence capabilities were supposed to be limited. How could they know about classified military deployments? "Furthermore," continued, "we've been analyzing your military communications for the past week. We know about Operation Thunderstrike, your plan to assault Earth while our fleet is away. We know about the biological weapons you've prepared for use against human civilians. We know about your secret alliance with the hegemony survivors." She smiled coldly. "We know because we've been listening to everything you've said, everything you've planned, everything you've done for the past 50 years. You never bothered to secure your communications against a species you considered primitive." Trade Minister Velen's tentacles had gone completely still, a sign of deep fear among her people. "What do you want from us?" she asked quietly. "Nothing," replied. "We don't want your approval, your membership, or your cooperation. We simply want you to understand the new reality." She activated a holographic display showing the galaxy. Red zones marked areas of conflict, yellow zones showed species under threat, and green zones indicated peaceful regions. Most of the galaxy was yellow or red. "This is what your system has created," said. "A galaxy where the strong prey on the weak without consequences, where entire civilizations disappear while you debate procedure, where justice is subordinated to political convenience." The display changed, showing new information. Blue markers appeared across the galaxy, indicating human fleet positions. There were far more of them than anyone had expected. "This is the new reality. Earth is establishing the Sol Defense Pact. Any species facing extinction-level threats can request our protection. We don't care about your borders, your trade agreements, or your political calculations. We care about preventing genocide." Chancellor found his voice finally. "You cannot simply ignore galactic law. The entire structure of civilization depends on respect for established authority." "Does it?" asked. "Your established authority has presided over the extinction of 17 species in the past century. Your galactic law protects the rights of conquerors while ignoring the pleas of the conquered. Your civilization is built on the graves of those too weak to defend themselves." She paused, letting that sink in. "We've decided to try a different approach, one based on the radical idea that genocide is wrong, regardless of politics." War Marshal slammed his fist on the table. "You threaten the stability of the galaxy. If every species decides to ignore law and act according to their own moral judgments, chaos will follow." "Marshal," replied calmly, "chaos is what we have now, species disappearing while you debate. Genocides ignored because they're politically inconvenient. Bullies like the hegemony running free because stopping them might upset trade relationships." The display changed again, showing detailed intelligence on every council fleet. Ship positions, weapons capabilities, crew numbers, supply lines. Information that should have been impossible for outsiders to obtain. "We're not threatening your stability," continued. "We're offering you a choice. Continue as you have been, pretending that politics matters more than lives, or recognize that someone in this galaxy still remembers what principles look like." "And if we choose to stop you?" War Marshal demanded. Smile was not pleasant. "Marshal, we've been preparing for this conversation for 50 years. We know exactly what your combined fleets can do. We've designed our weapons specifically to counter your technology. We've developed tactics specifically to exploit your weaknesses." She gestured to the intelligence displays. "More importantly, we understand something you've forgotten. War isn't about who has the biggest fleet. It's about who's willing to do whatever it takes to protect what they believe in." The chamber fell silent. Every representative stared at the displays showing their military secrets exposed. The humans hadn't just demonstrated superior technology. They had demonstrated superior intelligence gathering, superior planning, superior understanding of their enemies. "What happens now?" Trade Minister Velen asked quietly. "Now," replied, "you make a choice. You can recognize the Sol Defense Pact as a legitimate organization and respect our right to protect threatened species, or you can treat us as enemies and face the consequences." "And if we choose the second option?" Chancellor asked. His expression became very serious. "Chancellor, in the past week, we've received protection requests from 47 different species. Many of them are currently under threat from powers represented in this chamber. If you force us to choose between your approval and their survival, we will choose their survival every time." The transmission ended, leaving the council chamber in stunned silence. The representatives stared at each other, each knowing that the galaxy had just changed forever. The rules they had lived by for centuries no longer applied. Someone with the power to enforce different rules had entered the game. 6 months later, Captain stood on the observation deck of New Station, watching construction ships build homes for his people. The refugees who had fled the hegemony attack were coming home to a system protected by the Sol Defense Pact. Human ships patrolled the outer system, their crews working alongside officers who were learning new ways to fight. Young, now 13 and taller than when her burned, joined him at the window. She wore the uniform of the Space Academy, where human instructors taught courses on tactical theory and moral philosophy. "Captain," she said, "I've been accepted to the Earth Naval Academy. I'll be in the first exchange class." Smiled. The girl who had watched her world die was growing up to become a defender of other worlds. "Your parents would be proud." "I want to learn to fight like they do," said, watching a human patrol ship pass by the window. "I want to make sure no one else has to watch their world burn while politicians debate." Nodded. That was the real change the humans had brought to the galaxy. Not just superior technology or tactical brilliance, but a different way of thinking about responsibility. They had shown that sometimes, doing what was right mattered more than doing what was legal. Across the galaxy, the major powers were learning to adapt to the new reality. Some, like the Confederacy, had quietly begun cooperating with the Sol Defense Pact. Others, like the Empire, continued to plot resistance. But in the small systems where weak species lived in fear of stronger neighbors, something new was happening. For the first time in generations, the powerless had protectors who couldn't be bought, threatened, or reasoned out of their principles. Admiral stood in her ready room aboard the UES Indomitable, reviewing reports from across the galaxy. New protection requests arrived daily, some from species facing immediate threats, others from civilizations that simply wanted to know that someone would stand with them if the worst happened. Her communications officer entered with the latest intelligence reports. Admiral, we're detecting unusual fleet movements in 17 systems. It looks like some of the major powers are testing our response times. Nodded, she had expected this. The galaxy's traditional powers would probe for weaknesses, looking for ways to return to the old system where might made right, and the strong did whatever they wanted to the weak. Deploy additional patrol groups, she ordered, and send a message to Earth. Tell them to accelerate the shipbuilding program. We're going to need more ships. As her officer left to carry out the orders, returned to the reports. Somewhere in the galaxy, species she had never met were living free from fear because humans had decided that some things were worth fighting for. Children were growing up in safety because their older sister species had remembered what it felt like to almost die. It wasn't the galaxy the Council wanted. It wasn't the galaxy the major powers preferred. But it was the galaxy that the weak and defenseless deserved. And as long as Earth stood watch, that's the galaxy they would have. Outside her window, the stars shone with the light of a million worlds. On many of them, people slept peacefully for the first time in generations, knowing that someone was watching over them. Someone who understood that strength without compassion was just another form of weakness. Someone who remembered that the universe was a big, dark place, but it didn't have to be a cold one. The humans had come to remind everyone what it meant to be human, even if you weren't human yourself.